My mother kicked me out of my own house at 18. Now she came back begging to stay. But I hired lawyers and evicted them all without mercy. I'm 25 years old, I work in digital marketing, and I basically need to tell this story because I've been carrying this shit for years. And what happened a few months ago still keeps me up some nights, wondering if I did the right thing or if I'm the monster my family says I am. I guess I should start at the beginning, when I was 15 and my dad died. I don't remember much about the funeral. Honestly, it was all like this strange fog where people came and told me things that were supposed to comfort me, but only made everything feel more unreal. My dad, Joseph, was like 48 years old when he had the heart attack. He was in his office and just collapsed. By the time the ambulance arrived, it was too late. I was at school when it happened, and I still remember when the principal came into the classroom and told me my mom was waiting for me outside. You know that feeling in your stomach, when you know something is terribly wrong, but your brain hasn't processed what it is yet. That's what I felt, the whole way home. What came after the funeral was almost as surreal as the funeral itself. Turns out my dad had been very meticulous with his things, like obsessively organized, and he had a super detailed will that basically said everything. And when I say everything, I mean everything. He left to me. The two properties he had, one was the house where we lived and the other was an apartment he rented out, plus all his bank accounts and his investments. He left nothing to my mom, Michelle. And I know it sounds horrible, but it made sense, because technically they never got married. They'd been together like 18 years, but never did the legal paperwork. It was one of those things they always said they were going to do and never did. My dad had put everything in my name since I was born, like he'd been updating documents every few years. And his lawyer explained to me that legally, I was the owner of absolutely everything, but that obviously at 15 I couldn't manage anything alone, so my mom was left as something like an administrator until I turned 18. At that moment, I didn't really understand the implications of all this. I just knew my dad was gone and that he had tried to make sure I'd be okay. I guess. The first months after he died were weird. My mom was sad, or at least she seemed to be, but there was also something about her behavior that didn't quite add up for me. Like she cried at the funeral and all that, but 2 weeks later she was already organizing outings with friends and laughing on the phone. I was devastated, like I couldn't even concentrate at school, and she was already making plans to redecorate the living room because according to her, she needed a change. Looking back, I should have seen it coming. The signs were all there. Like 4 months after my dad died, my mom started casually mentioning a guy named Howard. At first it was just, oh, I met someone at the gym, or a friend recommended this restaurant to me, but then it became more obvious. Howard. This Howard that. Howard says I should do such and such thing. I was 15 and a half by then, and honestly I didn't care much. I was too deep in my own head, processing everything to pay attention to my mom's social life. But then, like 6 months after my dad's death, Howard showed up at the house. My mom introduced him to me as her friend, with that super fake smile you put on when you know you're lying but hope the other person doesn't notice. Howard was like 45 years old. He was one of those guys who clearly spent a lot of time at the gym but were already starting to lose the battle against age, with slightly thinning hair and that alpha male attitude that rubbed me the wrong way from the first second. He shook my hand super hard, like trying to prove something, and said something like, "So you're Blake. Your mom has told me a lot about you." And I just thought, who is this guy and why is he in my house? The thing is that after that first visit, Howard started showing up more and more, often. First he'd come for dinner, then he'd stay late. Then I started finding him in the kitchen, having coffee in the mornings. And my mom acted like all this was completely normal, as if it hadn't been 7 months since we buried my dad. I tried to talk to her once, like I told her I thought it was weird that she already had a boyfriend because that's what he was, obviously, even though she kept calling him her friend. And she came at me with how I didn't understand how hard it had been for her, that she also had the right to be happy, that my dad would have wanted her to move on with her life. What really started to bother me was when Howard began acting like he owned the house. He'd change the TV channel without asking, help himself to food from the fridge like it was nothing, started giving opinions about how we should organize things. And my mom supported him in everything. Like if I said I didn't like something, she automatically took his side. I remember once Howard said I should get rid of my dad's desk because it took up too much space in the living room. And I said, no way. That desk had belonged to my grandfather before and was important to me, and my mom told me I was being immature and clinging to the past. When I was 16, Howard basically already lived with us. There was never a conversation about it. They never asked me if I was okay with it. It just happened. And the worst part is, he also brought his kids. Rachel was like 17 at that time, and Logan was 16, a year older than me. Rachel was one of those super dramatic people who always needed to be the center of attention, and Logan was basically a copy of his dad, but younger and more idiotic version. My mom insisted we were all a family now, that I had to get along with my new siblings, and I thought, excuse me, what? These aren't my siblings, I barely know them. What really hurt me was when my mom started excluding me from things. One day I came home from school and found the whole family, my mom, Howard, Rachel, and Logan, at the table, eating pizza and watching a movie. And when I asked what they were doing, my mom said, "Oh, sorry, honey, we forgot to tell you we were doing movie night." They forgot? We lived in the same house. That started happening more often. They'd go out to dinner without me, go to the movies without inviting me, make plans for the weekend, and I'd find out when they were already leaving. And when I said something, my mom always had an excuse, that I'd been in my room and didn't hear when they asked, that they thought I had homework, that they assumed I wasn't interested. Meanwhile, Rachel and Logan had everything they wanted. Howard bought them things constantly, new clothes, video games, outings with friends, and my mom never said anything. But if I asked for something, even if it was something small, it was always, "We don't have money for that right now, Blake. You need to learn to be more responsible." And I knew there was money. There was literally money in the accounts my dad had left me, but my mom was the one managing them, and apparently that money was for my education and not to waste on nonsense, according to her. Things got really bad when I turned 17. By then, Howard was already acting like he was my dad, trying to set rules for me and telling me what to do. I remember one night I arrived like 15 minutes late from curfew, which he had set, not my mom. And he was waiting for me in the living room with that face like, "You're gonna see." He told me I was grounded for 2 weeks, that I couldn't go out with my friends, and when I told him he wasn't my dad and couldn't tell me what to do, he turned red with fury and started yelling at me that as long as I lived under his roof, I was going to follow his rules. And that's when I exploded. I told him, "Your roof? This isn't your roof. This is my house. My dad bought it. My dad paid every cent for this property and left it to me. You're nobody here. You're just my mom's boyfriend who moved into my house and is living for free." My mom came running out of her room and started yelling at me that I couldn't talk to Howard like that disrespecting him was disrespecting her, and I yelled back at her that she was the one disrespecting me, that she had brought this guy to live in the house my dad left us, and had let him take control of everything. Howard then went into super macho mode and told me that if I didn't like how things were, I could leave, and I told him he was the one who should leave, and we started yelling at each other, and my mom was crying and saying to stop, but neither of us stopped until we were basically in each other's faces. Rachel and Logan were watching everything from the stairs, probably enjoying it, honestly. The next day, my mom sat me down in the kitchen and gave me an ultimatum. She told me that Howard was part of her life now, that Rachel and Logan were part of her life, and that if I couldn't accept that and treat them with respect, then maybe I needed to find another place to live. I couldn't believe it. Like, "Are you kicking me out of my own house?" And she told me that technically, yes, it was my house, but I was a minor, and she was my mom, and had authority over me, and that if I continued with that attitude, I was going to have to go live with my grandparents. I called my paternal grandparents, Barbara and Raymond, that same afternoon. They had always been incredible with me. But after my dad died, my mom had started limiting the time I spent with them, always with excuses that I was too busy or that we had family plans. When I told them what was happening, they got furious. My grandmother especially was so angry she could barely speak. They told me I could come live with them whenever I wanted, that I would always have a place in their house. A week later, Howard and I had another fight. I don't even remember, well, why it started. I think it was because he moved some of my dad's things that I had in the garage without asking me. I complained to him, and he told me to stop living in the past, that my dad had been dead for 2 years now, and it was time for me to grow up. That was it. I completely lost control and started yelling at him that he had no right to mention my dad, that he would never be half the man my dad was, that he was a parasite living off what another man had built. My mom walked in just as I was saying that and took Howard's side immediately. She yelled at me that I was being cruel and horrible, that Howard had been nothing but good to me, that I was ungrateful and didn't appreciate everything they did for me. And then she said the words, "I'll never forget. I don't want you living here anymore. You have until tomorrow to pack your things and leave." I stood there like an idiot because part of me couldn't believe this was really happening. My own mom was kicking me out of my own house for a guy she'd barely known for a year and a half. I didn't cry. Not in that moment. I just went to my room and I started packing. I called my grandparents and told them I was heading their way. My grandmother was crying on the phone. My grandfather was saying they were going to talk to my mom, but I told them no, that it was already decided. The next morning I came downstairs with my suitcases, and my mom was in the kitchen with Howard. She didn't even look at me, just said she'd left some boxes in the garage for me to pack the rest of my things. I packed everything I could, photos of my dad, his personal things I still had, my clothes, my books, everything. Howard was watching me from the doorway with that satisfied smile that made me want to wipe it off his face. When I finished, my grandfather was already outside waiting for me. My mom came out when we were loading the car and said, "I hope this teaches you to value what you have." I just looked at her and said, "The only thing this is teaching me is what kind of person you really are." Living with my grandparents was the best decision I could have made, or well, that I was forced to make. They supported me unconditionally, helped me finish high school, encouraged me to apply to college. My mom called from time to time, but the conversations were super tense and superficial. She never apologized for kicking me out, never acknowledged that maybe she'd handled things badly. It was always me who needed to apologize, me who had to change my attitude. When I turned 18, everything changed legally. I wasn't a minor anymore, which meant I could now make decisions about my properties without my mom having to be involved. The first thing I did was go see my dad's lawyer, the same one who had handled the will, and review exactly what I had and what my situation was. Turns out my mom had been using the rent from the apartment we rented out for household expenses, which was fine because technically it was to maintain the home where I lived. But now I didn't live there anymore. I told the lawyer I wanted to take total control of everything, and he explained. I could do it, but I had to be strategic. I couldn't just show up and kick my mom out of the house without following certain legal processes. He told me the best thing was to wait, finish college first, get established, and then decide what I wanted to do with the properties. So, that's what I did. I focused on school, studied digital marketing, got internships, built my career. During those years, from 18 to 24, I had almost no contact with my mom. We'd see each other maybe at Christmas or some family birthday, but it was always super awkward. She acted like nothing had happened, asked me about school with that fake worried mom voice, but we never addressed the elephant in the room. Howard was always there too, and Rachel and Logan, all acting like the perfect family. It disgusted me, honestly. After graduating, I got a good job at a marketing agency and started making decent money. And then I started thinking seriously about what to do with the properties. The apartment we rented out was still generating income, but the house where my mom and company lived needed work. I'd seen photos on social media, because yes, I stalked occasionally, and it looked neglected, like they hadn't done maintenance in years. I made the decision. I was going to renovate the house and rent it out too, or maybe sell it, but first I needed them to vacate. I talked to my lawyer, and he helped me prepare all the necessary documents. Technically, I didn't need to give them any notice because it was my property and they'd never paid rent or anything, but my lawyer recommended I be generous and give them reasonable time to find another place. The plan was to wait until they went on vacation. My mom had posted on Facebook that they were going to the beach for 2 weeks, the whole happy family, with photos in bathing suits and those things. Perfect. In the week they left, I hired a locksmith and changed all the locks on the house. Then I hired a moving company, and carefully, I packed all their things. I didn't want them to say later that I damaged anything. I put everything in a storage unit that I paid for a month. When they came back from vacation and couldn't get into the house, My phone exploded. Calls, messages, everything. My mom was hysterical. Howard was furious. I didn't answer the first calls. I just sent them a text message that said, "The house is legally mine. Your belongings are in the storage unit at address X. You have 2 weeks to find another place to live." My mom showed up at my grandparents' house the next day. I was there because I knew that was going to happen. She was crying, saying how could I do this to her, that she was my mom, that they had nowhere to go. I stood firm and told her she should have thought about that before kicking me out when I was 17. She said that had been different, that I had been disrespectful to Howard, that she had done what she had to do as a mother. I told her, well, and I was doing what I had to do as the owner of my property. Howard then started threatening me, saying he was going to sue me, that I couldn't kick them out like that without legal notice, that there were tenant laws. My lawyer, who happened to be there because I'd asked him to come just in case, explained very calmly that no, there were no tenant rights because they'd never paid rent. There had never been a lease agreement, and that legally, I was being extremely generous by giving them 2 weeks and paying for a month of storage. My mom then changed tactics and started with the emotional blackmail. She told me Rachel was pregnant, that she was 19 years old and expecting a baby, that they were going to be grandparents. Well, she was going to be something like a grandmother. Howard was going to be a grandfather, technically, and how could I kick a pregnant girl out on the street? I told her Rachel wasn't my responsibility, that I was sorry about her situation, but that didn't change the fact that I had the right to do whatever I wanted with my property. Then the other relatives started calling. Aunts, uncles, cousins, all suddenly super concerned about my mom's situation. I received text messages that said things like, "How can you be so cruel to your own mother?" Or, "Family is the most important thing. Where is your heart?" They called me selfish, heartless, terrible son, everything. And the ironic thing is that none of those people had called me when my mom kicked me out of the house at 17. None of them had questioned that. But now suddenly I was the villain. I responded to a few. I told them that if they cared so much about my mom's situation, they could offer her a place to stay or lend her money to rent something. None offered anything concrete, just more sermons about what I should do. One of my uncles told me my dad would be disappointed in me, and that hurt, but also made me angry because that uncle had never been close to my dad. They barely spoke when he was alive. The 2 weeks passed, and if my mom still hadn't found a place, well, or that's what she said. I suspected she hadn't really looked, hoping I would back down. The day the deadline was up, I went to the house with my lawyer and with some of my grandparents because I knew it was going to get ugly. Sure enough, my mom, Howard, Rachel, Logan, and a bunch of relatives from her side were all there outside the house. My mom started begging me to give them more time, that they just needed a few more weeks. Howard kept up his aggressive attitude, but you could tell he was scared, like he realized that this time I was serious. Rachel was crying, touching her belly, doing the whole dramatic show possible. Logan was quiet. I think he was the only one who understood. They'd crossed the line. I told them no, that they'd had 2 weeks, and the deal was clear. My mom then started yelling at me, saying I was a monster, that my dad would be rolling in his grave if he knew what I'd become. I told her that my dad had specifically left those properties to me for a reason, that he knew exactly what he was doing when he wrote that will, and that I was honoring his memory by finally taking control of what was mine. One of my mom's uncles came up to me and told me to think about Rachel, about the baby that was on the way. I told him Rachel had parents, she had family, that it wasn't my problem, that if they cared so much, they should be looking for solutions instead of standing there trying to make me feel bad. I told them that if within the next 48 hours, they hadn't taken everything out of the storage unit and returned the keys, they had somehow copied keys. Yes, they'd tried to enter the house with copied keys. I was going to take more serious legal action. The scene was horrible. I'm not going to lie. My mom was a mess, crying for real, not like those times she cried to manipulate me. Part of me felt bad. I'm not made of stone. But the other part of me remembered everything that had happened, how they'd treated me, how they'd kicked me out without thinking twice, how they'd lived on my property for years without any gratitude or respect. My grandparents supported me completely. My grandmother told me afterwards she was proud of me for standing firm, that my dad would have been proud. My grandfather told me something that stuck with me. He said, "Family isn't just blood, it's respect and reciprocity, and they lost the right to call themselves your family when they treated you the way they treated you." In the end, they found a place. I don't know exactly where because I didn't care enough to ask. I know they ended up renting something smaller, probably something they could actually afford with what Howard made at his job. Rachel had her baby a few months later. I know because one of my aunts sent me photos without me asking. I guess trying to make me feel guilty, like, "Look what you're missing." I moved forward with my plans. I hired a renovation company and basically remodeled the whole house. I painted it, changed floors, updated the kitchen and bathrooms. It cost me a good amount of money, but it was worth it. Now, I'm renting it out for a decent price, and I'm using that money to invest in other things. The other property, the apartment, is also generating steady income. Financially, I'm doing well. Better than I've ever been. But emotionally, it's complicated. I'm not going to lie. There are days when I wonder if I did the right thing, if I should have been more flexible, if I should have given more time. But then I remember everything, and I realize I did exactly what I had to do. For years, I let them walk all over me. I let my mom prioritize other people over me. I let them live on my property while I had no voice or vote. My mom still tries to contact me from time to time. She sends me messages on my birthday, at Christmas, messages that say things like, "I hope you're well," or "I miss you." I read them but don't respond. I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive her completely. Honestly, I don't know if I want to. She made her choice when she chose Howard over me, when she kicked me out of the house for not accepting her new family. I'm just making my own choice now. Some relatives still look at me weird at the reunions I go to, which are few. I feel their stares. I hear their whispers. I know they talk about me, that they say I'm selfish, that I turned my back on my family in their time of need. But I don't care as much as I used to. I've learned you can't control what people think of you, especially when they don't know the whole story or when they choose to ignore important parts of it. My grandparents are still my biggest support. They constantly remind me I did the right thing, that my dad would be proud that I finally took control of my inheritance. Sometimes I sit at my dad's desk, the same one Howard wanted to throw away, and think about how he would have handled this situation. I think he'd understand. I think he'd support my decision. He was the one who left me those properties for a reason, who made sure legally they were mine, who trusted that someday I'd know what to do with them. Last week, my mom sent me a long message, basically saying Rachel and the baby are fine, but they're going through financial difficulties, that Howard lost his job, that they're struggling with rent. She asked me if I could lend them money or if I could lower the rent on the apartment if they moved in there. I responded after thinking about it for a few days. I told her no, that would be going back to the same cycle as before, that I hope they're okay, that I really wish them well, but that I can't be their safety net after everything that happened. I don't know what's going to happen from here on out. Honestly, I don't know if my mom and I will ever be able to have a normal relationship, if she'll ever really understand why I did what I did. Part of me misses having a mom, you know? I miss the idea of what a mom should be. But the reality is she stopped being my real mom years ago, when she decided her new family was more important than her own son. For now, I'm focused on my life, on my career, on building something of my own. The properties my dad left me are my foundation, my starting point to create something bigger. And maybe that's what he wanted from the beginning, for me to have the chance to start without depending on anyone, without having to ask permission, without having to put up with mistreatment just to have a roof over my head. So yes, I kicked my mom out of my house. And most days, I don't regret it. Most days, I know I made the right decision. And that has to be enough.